everyone. I'm so excited for our very first episode to have Brittany Jones. She is the chair of the Urban Ag Alliance of Lucas County and a PhD student at the University of Toledo studying spatially integrated social sciences. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thanks for having me.
So, we met like a few years ago.
Yes.
And it's been, I don't know how long it's been.
It's been a while. It's been probably about like 3 years.
Yeah. So Brittany and I were doing some like anti-childhood hunger work.
Right.
We just intersected briefly and then kind of went this way. And then I find you at this conference.
I know, but I've been going to the conferences for a couple years. So it's for you to even sit there, and it's funny because the woman I was talking to, she mentioned your name, and I said, "Is that the right Whitney that I know?" And here you come, sitting right there beside me at the table.
Magic. Like I feel like we are supposed to be here right now, and the work you're doing is so inspiring, and I love it because you are like where I want to be in 5 years and like where I want my community in Marion to be. The work you're doing has so many profound local, statewide, and national implications. So I'm so excited.
Thank you
Tell
so
us
much.
what you're doing. Share with everyone about your work and your research, and just tell us about you.
Just me. Okay. Well, just like you said, I'm born and raised in Toledo. Basically just got involved with food security and food justice actually while I was doing my master's. So my master's is in urban planning, and that really opened up the door to food systems planning. I went to Wayne State, so it's really, really big as far as what they're doing in terms of food security and just food accessibility throughout the city. And from there, I didn't know what urban planning was. And once hooked up with a professor within just food security studies, that's when I really wanted to look more into, okay, well, why is this like this? Why are some people that are within neighborhoods that are disinvested, they're having health issues, but it's cheaper food? So I didn't make that connection that cheaper food equals just unhealthy food in some instances, and especially with the outlets that are within certain neighborhoods. Or why are farmers, the traditional farmers, going bankrupt when there are a lot of people and a lot of outlets that need their fresh food? So then it's like a rabbit hole once you go down and really start to investigate this food system, the globalized and commercialized food system. Now, that's not talking about the local food system, but once I started getting into my studies, that's what really sparked my interest. So that's what led me to my PhD. And even though it's spatially integrated social sciences and it has a basis in geography and planning, it really is interdisciplinary. So I'm studying just how the reemergence of just Black individuals that are getting their land back and actually invested in urban agriculture, or just trying to reinvigorate and refocus how food access and food system in general is not equal. There are two different sides, maybe three different sides, depending on who you're talking to. And so what I'm looking at is just how government entities can help in that. So with land accessibility, why is it more leasing than renting? What's happening? Why is it affecting how people get food? So it's a lot of interplaying of just the characters and people and just different aspects that really make up our food and how we get it from the ground to our table. So the other movement. So it's a lot. It is a lot out there. And I'm so glad that you're actually doing this because of this reemergence and the spark of, okay, well, we need to start growing our own food now. We can't rely on the commercialized food system anymore. So it's time for us to take it into our own hands. And that's what a lot of Black people are doing right now. And I wouldn't even say just Black people, but just people in general that are understanding that we have to be more interactive, be participatory within how we get our food and our health, of course. But diet is definitely a big, big, big part of that.
I love that. And I hear like such a theme of empowerment. And
Mm-hmm.
some folks may join our call and like they're unfamiliar with this movement. And can you tell us what you mean when I love when you say getting land back, because what you're really talking about is moving from food security efforts to food sovereignty.
Yes.
And for
Yep.
folks that this is new, maybe they're not even aware of this space. What do you mean when you say Black people get their land back?
Well, basically just trying to either purchase land within their municipalities, whether it's within the city or even out in the rural areas. But I believe that's a little bit more difficult. So it's mostly focused within urban and maybe like ex-urban suburban areas. However, with that, they're just leasing it as well. However, that has proven to be some sort of conundrum because they can take it right back. Though, and when I say they, it's city officials or just whoever owned that land before. If you don't own it, they can do whatever they want, and usually it's in the name of money. So just economics, and that's another big thing that people need to be aware of. And why is it so difficult to gain access to vacant land that is probably just taking over neighborhoods? Why can't we buy that? So it's a lot of things, a lot of questions that are arising within this movement, and a lot of difficulties that they're facing because of that, whether it's race or economics, where you live, or just the time that you have, who you're partnering up with, because one person, that takes a lot of work, especially depending on how much land you're buying. So that movement, and it's mostly taking place in the South. However, you are seeing some of that up here in the North and also on the East Coast. So Washington, D.C., Baltimore, even some like Virginia, in some instances, North Carolina. So it's a lot of just different small entities that are really taking this seriously and actually adding it to their mission, and to bring acknowledgement of the disproportion when it comes to food and growing your own food.
So in Toledo, are you working with properties that were owned by the land bank or city land banks, vacant, like where there might be vacant properties or like homes that were blighted and demolished?
Well, actually, what we're trying to do is the Urban Ag Alliance is basically, we are a voice for the growers and the farmers within the city. So that does include if it's some land that they may have interest in, we'll try to see how they would get that. What would they have to do? Can they actually purchase it? Because a lot of these programs, whether through the land bank, the city auditor, or even the city land bank, because Toledo has two. They have the county land bank and then they have the city land bank. So depending on which entity that you go through, it could either be easier or more difficult. Usually it can be more difficult if you're trying to purchase it, but that's only because, well, that's only if you don't live in the neighborhood. So it's harder if you don't live in the neighborhood. However, if have a home and then it's a vacant lot next to you, you can actually add it to your home, or you can purchase it in some other fashion or form. Especially if you're a nonprofit within the neighborhood. Usually you can have some access with purchasing, but it's mostly leasing. And that is why it's important to try to get that differentiation, because when you're leasing, you're not owning it. And like I said before, that usually leads to eminent domain. Well, you don't have any sort of um, economic buy-in within this land, so we can just take it and we can actually build something else on top of it that will bring us some money. So that has happened in California in some case studies over on the West Coast, where a lot of nonprofit, whether it's indigenous or they are doing it for people of color, depending on how their mission is, that had land, purchased it from the city, and then it was basically the private owner said, no, I don't want them on the land, and it was destroyed. That was after 5 years of them doing hard work and actually repurposing. The main thing for this is repurposing. If a vacant parcel is just sitting there, it's not bringing any sort of money, any sort of activity. So that's why it is important to actually look into this. How can you have that buy-in?
And when you're talking about like they give the land and then they take the land back, it's like, God, history is just repeating itself.
Yes.
How do we
Yes.
stop that cycle?
That's a good question. How can you stop that cycle after years? Well, I don't even say years, centuries, decades. Like I said, it's mostly happening in the South, where a lot after slavery, a lot of the slaves had land, even though it was a little bit. But over time, especially after the Great Migration, and everybody wants to have better jobs, agriculture sort of died after that. So a lot of those older farmers who were hoping on passing this down to their children are up north now, because we're in the 20s now, 1920s. So the children are up north now, and they're working. They're working and trying to get more money. However, at the same time, now their land, because their parents or whoever can't keep up with the payments, whatever sort of arrangement was agreed upon beforehand, usually as a divisive motive, but they're losing it. And they're losing it whether they're not getting paid, they're losing it illegally because of some sort of, they couldn't get paid because of some sort of like ridiculous arrangement, or adding interest, credit. So it's a lot of devices that were used that took place and just took away their land. However, now that's coming back. So now they're really trying to work with those who are interested or want to repurchase their family land and trying to get it back. What is Southern? I think the Southern Federation of. I have to look that back up, but that's a big organization that's helping farmers or those descendants of the land get it back, to just repurchase it. And most of the time it is for food security purposes, and that is really what they're trying to do. Now up here it can be a different story. So with the land banks and with just the into government entities in general, development is key. It is essential because that's how they get their money. So a lot of the land is valuable. It basically determines how we walk, how we operate every day. So to them, it is a commodity, it is an asset. However, when you talk about food sovereignty movements, land is a community asset that should be used for the good of the people, for their health. It's two different things. Which one is going to win? Most likely the other definition, because the development. And of course, wherever this land is located, it could be valuable at some point in time. So a lot of private landowners will hold for years. And that's another issue. And sometimes they don't even live in the city. So it's a lot of just gaps and inconsistencies that are rising to the surface, and is putting a little bit of fire under some people, as far as, okay, we need to do something now. We need to do something, especially with the virus. Yeah. It's apparent now. We can't just sit around anymore. Our health depends on it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, when you talk about land is for community and that debate of commodity or community, it reminds me a lot of what's going on with the virus right now. And it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said, in time of crisis, are we going to choose chaos or community? And that quote has resonated with me this whole time, because now we are in this space to imagine something new. And when you were talking about space earlier, I think I've been exploring like liminal space and what liminal spaces mean and how we're in this space of transformation. Should we choose to go a different direction? Should we decide to leave the weight of our prejudice and discrimination and hate behind and imagine a new future? And pulling from a lot of the work that I'm inspired by is Leah Penniman, Soulfire Farms, and Afrofuturism that has always pushed for new, always reimagined, and always led with such like pleasure and joy in our work, rather than the weight sometimes of activism that feels heavy and burdensome.
I'm so glad that you brought her up, because I believe that Soulfire Farms is having a Ask a Sister Farmer series that's happening on Friday. Well, Fridays during the May. So that's how you know how important this is. the conversations are just growing more and more. And actually, that is kind of how it started here in Toledo. What was happening was there was a farmer, urban farmer called Thomas Jackson, and he is actually within one of the neighborhoods that I was born in. So he was buying up a lot of parcels, a lot of land, and people didn't like that. What they're asking, what are you doing? Why do you need this land? On top of that, he was a contractor for the city as well. So it was a lot, and this is all like public knowledge. It happens like probably about like 3 4 years ago, and it's still kind of continuing right now. But he was just getting constantly hit with fines, getting losing contracts, just not basically he wasn't following what they wanted him to do. And what he's trying to do is literally has a farm, and he's growing, has 6 different areas throughout the neighborhood and growing different things. And it's not just, oh, I'm planting this in the ground, I have raised beds. No, he's actually like doing soil remediation. He's trying to bring in more just healthier soil because that's where it starts. And so with that, that also gives back to your vegetables and what you're eating. Because if you don't have healthy soil, then what kind of food are you eating? You're just taking up the contaminants if you don't get it tested. So that's what he's doing. He's also like growing mushrooms. He's growing elderberries. He has okra. He has like peppers, greens, just anything that you would imagine a farm would have. He has it. And he's doing it in the middle of a neighborhood that was once disinvested and nobody was thinking about it at all. And of course, it was majority melanated people that was living in there. And also that's the new term that I've been using is majority melanated neighborhoods, because of course, with me being in science, just science in general, those terms have to change as well, because that negative stigma when you're describing neighborhoods and why they should get some assets and why others shouldn't, basically usually the lingo that is being used deters that. So it's a lot of changes, and it's really just putting your foot forward, just like Thomas Jackson was doing. And that also grew into other people starting farms. So other Black men and women starting farms within neighborhoods. Now, to say as far as how that works out, because, farming takes a long time. You have to be patient. But with him, he's doing it. And the other ones, they're getting back up, the steam back up, because it wasn't part of their main mission, but just a facet of it. However, there is another organization that is popping up here who is all about land keeping. So they are really focusing on how the land is being treated, who is in control of the land, how can we as melanated people control the land that's within our neighborhood, and how can that be a benefit, not just for our health, but economically. How can we use this to improve economics and to bring money back into the neighborhood? Well, if you grow your own food, obviously you can sell it. Obviously you can use so much, or entrepreneurship, get the children involved. So that's what Toledo is trying to do. We're starting, we're starting to grow and understand that this is a priority, even though it's always been a priority as far as public health, but not in terms of food security or just economics through food. So it is 2 different viewpoints that you have to look at it. Most of food security issues and health issues are always under public health initiatives.
Yeah.
And so that's what takes a lot of the, I guess it would take a lot of the importance and priority out of just what food and food production means in the city, because you're just putting it under this big old umbrella of just public health.
And it controls the narrative a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Controlling the narrative when it's definitely not a blanket solution, definitely not just a blanket discussion. There are different levels because people experience the same thing in a whole bunch of ways. So how can you pick one solution that can cover everything? It doesn't work that way. And that's why these movements are happening.
And how do you leave out acknowledging racism in public health? in Marion County, 71% of Black children experience poverty. And I live in Delaware County right next door, and 5% of white kids experience
Wow.
poverty. And
And
so
I'll
to
say this is
not say like race
I know.
matters.
But
And so I
it's
would
just
find
crazy.
like, I'm in this institution, and like, how do I work in and with and against the institution at all times? It's like that.
Oof. And
It's hard.
yeah, and it is hard. And like you said, you're in an institution that, controls knowledge. It controls knowledge, just like myself. I'm in an institution that controls knowledge. But that's also why I'm doing this degree, because I can control the knowledge too. I can get terms in there that people have not talked about. I can change that narrative. So a lot of scholars of color and food scholars of color, that's what they're doing. And that's really a big subject that's coming up right now. It's always been talked about for years, but it's definitely being more involved in on a national and global level now. It's not just here and there or on a local case study type. No, this is a global issue and a global discussion. However, it has more impact on a local level though. And just like you pointed out with Marion, Toledo's the same way. The same way. However, we're still trying to figure out what's going on. We're still trying to figure out how can we move this idea of food sovereignty and food justice and put it within our city politics and just city operations. It has to be part of the bigger discussion. It has to be part of master plans. Why aren't you thinking of this? And I love the one conference that we went to, and they were talking about how redlining affects food access. Brilliant. That shows the historical implications, and that shows that it's still happening. The results are still here today, but now people are taking the power back. Empowerment through consumption. That's what I say.
Yeah. And for some folks, like, when we talk about food justice, we've titled this series Food Justice. I'm not familiar with another extension program tied to this language before. And, I'm trying to introduce something new and relevant to all Ohioans. So what does food justice mean to you?
Food justice means to me is that all people, despite despite race, has their equal access to healthier food options. I'm not just talking about fruits and vegetables. I'm talking about just food options in general. And it also means that this conversation is basically taking place in higher decision makers' offices. And also that citizens are taking control, is taking their power back. That's what food justice, everybody is fighting for a cause. And this cause is just making sure that people have, it's a right. You have to give people healthier food. If you don't have healthier food, you won't have healthier people. And if we want to talk about economics, now you're going to have sick people that are working that are probably going to use up all the money because they're doing sick leave or they have to take vacations due to health issues. So now what does that do? Now your economy is suffering because you have all these sick people, even though they're employed, but are they fully engaged? Are they fully participating in doing their work? Well, if they're having health issues because they have unhealthy food, no, and you suffer. But some people aren't getting that connection or still don't understand why this is important, because it doesn't make any sense why some grocery stores are not located in neighborhoods. Yeah, you can say, oh, it's no spaces, or the residents won't be able to afford food, and so it's not we're not going to waste our time. But why can't we have local co-op grocery stores? How can we get that started? How can we get a community grocer within these neighborhoods, collaborate? So we're talking about this social enterprise, and just have it owned by the people. What's wrong with that? What are the obstacles stopping that? So now we're going back to land and what is important to why you need this land. Because if a store is not going to give us any money, as far as a municipality type issue, then I'm not going to sell you this land because I feel that that's not lucrative. That's an issue. And that's also part of food justice.
Yeah, I see how you're like tying land as like the root of wealth, and like that's some pushback I receive is these ideas are outlandish. Who's going to pay for them? It's,
It's always money. Look, it's always money. And that's always the issue. Who's going to pay for this? Who's going to manage this? Who's going to be there on a sustainable basis for years to come? Well, if you're also on a grant that's only like a year, or you're not paying anybody, they're like volunteers, or they have a little stipend, you may not have as much investment in this project. And so we also have to think about the people involved. What are they getting from this? How can we keep that energy up? What can we do? And so that's where like the municipalities and the local governments can come into play, because they can do those incentives.
mm-hmm.
And the institutions. So OSU, UT, that's where we can come in and be like, okay, here's how we can help. Why can't we do that? So it's a lot.
What advice do you have for communities like Marion, who we've worked with the land bank,
Mm-hmm.
and Jason Schauber, he is a city council person in Marion who has lent his land or given his land to a historically Black church. And
Mm-hmm.
together we're all working on, the first year was just growing it into a garden. And then the second year, the virus hit, but our intention, and hopefully our intention can still be, we can grow out there. And then I don't know if selling's going to work this year. I don't know what the situation is with
Yeah.
our farmers market yet, but like, how do we grow this movement? How do we bring and center these ideas? Because for Black people and white people alike, like these are really new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Mm-hmm.
though they're really rich in actually tradition, and when you
Mm-hmm.
look at even prior to slavery, like Africans were captured because they're so good at agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
and their traditions were stolen and used to build the wealth of America.
Mm-hmm.
How do we center all that and create a movement and bring in our government agencies without scaring everyone off?
And just the fact that you were just talking about the history of it, that's usually when people start like, okay, I'm not trying to hear this. And that's usually what gets people out of it. But those conversations need to be had. We talk about just being equal and all this other stuff, but we already know there are like two different Americas. And we have to acknowledge that. It's nothing bad to acknowledge it, but just know that it exists and what you need to do in order to counteract that. You don't have to have this large goal of, okay, I'm just about to change everything. Start in your neighborhood. Start with the people that you're working with. Talk. And I'm not just talking about like planning and stuff. Talk about the motivation behind this project. What really are you trying to accomplish here? What are you trying to show? Because if this is successful, you can replicate it and you can use that evidence to bring it up further within your local government to show that this is important. And that's what Urban Ag Alliance is trying to do. We're trying to get that data, because everybody's talking about data, or they don't think nobody isn't interested within the city. We're trying to get the data. People are interested. So now we have to prove it. And that's what they rely on. Because if now people don't have that evidence, why are they just going to invest in something that's a could be possibility? That's not concrete enough. So you have to understand that people are going to need different things from you. And versus just telling a great story and just empowerment and stuff like that. No, people want evidence. How is my money being spent if they're invested? And if after a year you can see something, even though that's not a very big change, give it like 2 years. Plan that long term. Be proactive. Don't react. Be proactive. A lot of reactive projects, they usually die within the year, because that energy is gone. And they're not interested anymore. That's usually what happens with community gardens. The energy is there at first, and then once people realize all the work has happened, is no, I'm not doing that. I'm gone. So plan long term. Don't just do it for the duration of the grant or use a grant in order to propel you for another 3 years. Just something that you have done within these first 2 years of a grant, if it's that long, well, start planning for something for a long 5 year. Do a 5 year plan, do a 10 year plan if you're that ambitious. And I love how you brought up just Black churches. They're getting in it. They have all this land. Why won't you use that? You are a community asset. So these projects, you can do that. You can do that. So it's about talking, transparency, data, and proactive planning.
Mm.
That's really the advice. And just keeping that energy up. You have to have that motivation. It's hard work. And with something that's new like this, and that we have to take into our own hands on top of just everything in life, you have to understand that. You have to realize that it's going to be hard work. It is.
Are there ways that in the work you're doing that you're in the beginning of our conversation, you talked about how generations before were doing farming, were gardening. Are there ways that you're using those elders or capturing those stories to connect to the generation that we grew up in?
So happy that you asked that, because actually that's part of my research. I want to get those elders because that's how wisdom is passed down. There are programs going on where they partner up grandparents. It doesn't necessarily have to be just grandparents to their grandchild, but they can be a grandparent to another child, and they're teaming them up and putting them in the garden so they can learn from one another. But also there's new techniques that are being involved, but it's probably some things that they know that could solve a problem that has been just plaguing produce for years. So we have to get those elders in. So what we're trying to do is capture that wisdom, get the elders out there if they can. Well, of course, not right now, but get them out there if they can, and just really start, show us what your magic was. I remember my grandparents, they had a garden in the back. The neighbors, when I was growing up, I lived in the Junction area, which is now one of the main just Black neighborhoods that are also taking back land as far as just gardening and food and everything on top of just community development. But in that area, I remember neighbors having gardens, just little plots, and they came from the South. So all this is basically, it has to be revived, and that's what's happening. And that's actually part of my charge as a researcher, to take that experience I had with my grandparents and just bring it to the forefront and put it out there, because now it's needed. It's needed, and we have to talk about it. So don't X out the elders. They have so much wisdom. Don't do that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how we capture those oral histories, and there's so much wisdom. And although some of them might be too frail to be in the garden, I love how you're doing this like mentorship piece. Mm-hmm. Mentorship is like such a buzzword right now, such a like hot thing. And so that's definitely something I'm going to share back in Marion.
Yes, it is great, because I'm really big on collaboration, and there are people who want to do everything by themselves, and then they get burnt out early in the process. The point of collaboration is, you may not be the expert in one thing, but I'm pretty sure you can find somebody who's the expert in another thing that won't have you going back and fixing mistakes because you thought you knew what you were doing. So collaboration is key, because it opens up doors to resources that you probably didn't realize it was out there. Mm-hmm. And that can help what you're trying to do. So just be open. Of course, don't, if you trust people really like all like that, share your ideas, just put it out there, but still understand why you're doing it.
So one of the final questions I want to ask you, and you kind of got us to this point of why. Like, why should Ohioans care about urban agriculture? Why should folks care about land transfer? What does this matter?
Well, I mean, that goes back just through empowerment. I mean, if you rely on the system for some time, and we're seeing the breakdown of the traditional system now with this virus, if you rely on them, you it's basically just like a lose-lose situation. Not saying that it's bad, but don't have that just be your only option. And also, you get this feeling of just growing your own stuff that you did it. Like you actually did it. And I know people get excited about that. When you're growing your own food, is just something, some feeling of accomplishment. And that you have that accomplishment of feeding your family, feeding your neighbors, but also you're prepared because there's going to be food shortages because of this virus. What's happening right now is that the traditional farmers are having issues trying to sell their produce because restaurants are closed. They are also having issues with trying to keep up with the bills and with the consumption that we're trying to, because everybody's buying stuff. So they're trying to keep up with the demand. They're losing money because one, if they can't sell it to other, contracts, or if they don't have a big contract with a big box supermarket, then they're probably going to go bankrupt and they're probably going to lose their farm. So with that, we can't, like I said, we can't rely on that anymore. So that's why it's important for urban agriculture to make a bigger statement and have a bigger presence in Ohio. I mean, we have agriculture all up and through Ohio. You see it going down like to Columbus anyway, on 75 South and 23. You see all of that. So what's happening is, and it's probably barren and everything, but what you can do is that understand it's okay to grow. It's just a little small plot in the back because you can't and I'm going to keep saying it, you just can't rely on it. You can't rely on the system anymore. We are seeing literally the breakdown what's happening, and so be prepared. So that if anything, just know that there are food shortages coming, so be prepared. And that's why it should be important. We need to have other avenues of how we get our food, and even if it's on smaller acreage or just vacant plots, we have it. So how can we invest in it to make it grow? That's what needs to be talked about. Because anybody can have a garden. I mean, of course, even if you are in an apartment building, you can do container gardens. But for big productions, not taking up acreage, but just being smart about it, vertical growing, that can be an option as far as feeding the public. If you really wanted to go that route, that's still urban agriculture, just a different way. Take an abandoned building and just repurpose it for vertical growing. So again, going back, it just has to be it has to be a vital thing that we need to put out there in Ohio, that we have to start looking at urban agriculture as another option to get food, because it's not going to be pretty in these coming months at all. To the point where they're throwing away food. Like that's the thing. Farmers are throwing away food because they can't sell it. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
And I love your advice about it's okay to grow, because that has so many implications for really literally growing. But also, as people are listening to this conversation and maybe this is like uncomfortable, you've not thought about it before, like it's okay to grow outside of your comfort zone.
Yes.
And my colleague keeps saying, as we flatten the curve, grow outside your comfort zone. And I just love
that. I love that. I love that. And this is the first step. And it is quite thrilling to grow your own food. I can tell you that. I can't tell you how excited I was to grow like my first tomato. It was only one, but it was one tomato that I grew. So it was great. It was great. Now just imagine if you have like a little 10 by 10 plot or like a little basket with just things growing out of it. It's great. You don't have to start small. Start small. If you're really interested in it, start small research. What zone are you in? And if we were talking just agriculture, what zone are you in? What seeds, what fruits and vegetables thrive in our zone right now? Do your research. Don't just throw stuff in the ground just because you want to. Grow what you eat. That's the thing. Grow what you eat, because now you're just going to add to the food waste, and then it's just like, what was the point?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It has to really, Ohioans need to understand this importance. We may be an agricultural sector, but majority of that what's being grown out there, it does not come is usually in other products, and most of the time we can't eat it just out the ground anyway. So that's really the issue. That's really it.
If folks want to learn more about your organization, or if they want to donate or support you, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, we do have a page, Facebook page, Urban Agricultural Alliance of Lucas County. We're in the midst of trying to expand our social platforms, so keep an eye out for that, and also trying to start a newsletter. And if you want to donate, just message us at on Facebook, and then we can make some arrangements. But yes, that will definitely help our work, definitely help with the vision that we're trying to put out here in Toledo, and maybe expand it. And we're always looking for partners to collaborate all the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been great
Thank you.
to have you on the show.
Yes, thank you so much.